Hi, hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny, and for the last 10 days or so, I've had my parents visiting from Canada, which was really wonderful. It was so good to see them. They've gone home now, but while they were visiting, I had a bit of a mission. And my mission was to get as much knitting done as I could on a sweater that I'm making for my mum. I wanted to get as much of the yoke done at least as I could while she was here so that I could fit it on her. And not to toot my own horn, but I got pretty far. I'm really pleased with the progress I made. So that is the main thing that I have to talk to you about today, and let's jump right in. So if you were with me last time, you may recognize the sweater that I am wearing. This is the warm-up sweater by Espace Tricot, and I'm so pleased I got it finished. I've been wearing it a ton. I don't actually have that much more to say about this sweater. If you're interested, I talked about this lots in the previous episode that I've uploaded. But I guess one thing to say is that in the previous episode, I had been talking about how I was going to run out of this main gray and I needed to do something else with the sleeves. And I believe that at the point when I filmed, my plan was to go with the darker gray, the darker than this medium shade on the sleeves. But once I got to the point where I was actually going to do that, I realized that the white had greater, it's not white, it's a light gray, but this lighter gray had more contrast, had greater contrast with the main color than the darker color did. It was just a little bit farther away. And I decided to go with greater contrast, and I could not be more pleased. This is one of those situations, I don't think I would have done this if I hadn't been forced to by running out of the medium gray. If I'd had enough medium gray to do the whole sweater, I think that's what I would have done. And I'm so glad that I ran out, because I love this. And in fact, my partner he's very proud of my knits. He's very proud of all the knitting that I do. He's very sweet and supportive. He doesn't have a huge interest in knitwear, but every time I wear this, he's like, that light looks so good. That's fun, that change there. So that makes me feel pretty good, because it's always nice when the people that you love are excited about your knitting with you. So I'm very, very pleased with that. I made these sleeves a little bit longer than I usually do, just to make it a really warm, cozy sweater. That has been driving me nuts a little bit when I try to do things like dishes with it, so it's definitely one that I have to fold back to do things with. But this is the challenge, isn't it? You either make a sweater that's a very practical length for doing things, but then you can't pull it up over your hands, or you make one that's really warm and cozy and you can pull it up over your hands, but it occasionally drives you nuts, or at least that's my experience. Does anyone else have that? But I wouldn't change that. I'm really pleased with it, and it is so warm. Wearing the Plötulopi, this is my first knit Plötulopi piece, and it is definitely prickly. Even with a shirt underneath, I always wear a shirt underneath my knitwear, just because that's the way I would like to wear my knitwear. I'm cold, I like that extra layer, I like that extra protection from any potential scratch. Even with the underlayer, it is definitely a fairly scratchy jumper. So that is something to keep in mind if you are sensitive to that kind of thing. When I was having so much fun knitting with this, I was thinking, oh, I want to knit this for everybody. But there are definitely people in my life who are too sensitive for this against their skin, so maybe hats. But that's the warm-up sweater with the sleeves completed. I'm delighted, hooray. And I mean, in most ways this is a sad turn of events, but in terms of knitwear, it's a nice turn of events. The UK has been having a very cold April, so I'm still having lots of opportunity to wear this. In terms of my seasonal preferences, I wouldn't mind putting this away at some point, but for the time being, at least it's a little spark of joy while the weather continues to be quite cool and damp, and with a sharp wind, so this is very welcome. And of course, the next project, the one that I'm talking about for most of today, is very much related to this project, because my mum actually bought the wool for this sweater and for the one I'm knitting currently in Iceland. She bought it all as a bunch, a sweater's quantity in kind of grayscale yarns, grayscale Plötulopi for me, and a brown beige scale Plötulopi sweater's quantity for herself. And I said last time, but just to summarize quickly, Mum bought this intending to knit a sweater herself, but has kind of realized that sweater knitting is not her jam. She doesn't love how long it takes, it just doesn't bring her joy. So she's sticking to gardening and sewing. She brought me more pajama pants on this visit, so I was very pleased, and baking and all sorts of wonderful things like that. and I think she was a bit shocked that I was willing to knit a sweater for her when I offered, and I'm overjoyed for all sorts of reasons. I feel a bit like I'm knitting, you know, at this rate I'm going to end up with more sweaters than I can wear, so I was really overjoyed to knit one for her. I really enjoyed working with the Plötulopi, and, you know, my mom is one of my, you know, my parents are both some of my favorite people in the whole world, so it's really nice to be able to do some nice things for them, especially when they're coming all the way here to visit. So, let me show you what I am knitting for her. So, get the front and back organized, because I got so far. Look at this. So I did finish the yoke, but there's a little bit of a cheat involved in finishing the yoke, so I do need to specify that. So before I get ahead of myself, let me give you some details for this pattern, because this is the Stormur pattern by Meiju Kallio, who is a Finnish knitwear designer. She does also have a YouTube channel, which I only discovered as I was looking her up to talk about her here, but I'm really pleased to know about the YouTube channel. It's great. And she releases almost all of her videos, I think almost all of them, in both Finnish and in English, which seems like a whole extra feat on top of everything else. She's doing it all twice. So very much recommend that, and very much recommend this pattern. So far it's been great, very, very clear, and just knitting up really beautifully. So this is the Stormur, and the pattern calls originally for Istex Plötulopi. I am of course substituting Istex Plötulopi and holding it double. That's a very common, comfortable substitution, so I wasn't nervous about that at all. And the pattern calls for 18 stitches and 20 rows. And I have to tell you, if you've been with me before, you will have heard me talk about how I like a tight garment, I like a tight gauge, and I'm almost never on gauge, or I almost never choose to knit at gauge. This one, I am on gauge. I don't think that's ever happened to me. I'm comfortably on gauge, and I'm so happy with the fabric. It's turning out so thick and woolly and wonderful, and will be so good for Mom during those really tough, cold parts of Canadian winter. So really, really pleased with the gauge. I am knitting the size S+ for Mom, and so far it's looking like it's going to fit her really well. I'm not making any, well, I was going to say I'm not making any sizing modifications the way that I usually do, but that's not true. I have made a few, so let me start talking about modifications, since I'm already kind of stumbling into that. The first modification that I made at my mom's request is that the pattern calls for one of the contrast colors to be what you cast on with at the collar. But my mom's contrast colors were either this quite light beige or this quite dark brown. And she didn't want either of those next to her face. She really wanted this main color, the main brown, which you can see is really a beautiful, like quite a dynamic brown. That's the one that she wanted closest to her face. So I cast on the collar with that. I am already, and even before I cast on, I was worried, and I was kind of warning Mom, you know, we probably won't be able to, with the amount of wool that we have, do the collar and the cuffs and the ribbing on the body all in the main color. Just the way that this works out, just the way that the pattern is calling for other contrast colors, that might not happen. And Mom doesn't mind. As long as it's the warm brown up near her face, she's not too fussed about what happens with the rest of the sweater. But this is one of those situations where I was really eager to cast this on. Of course, you know, I really wanted to get lots of knitting done while they were here. We did have quite a bit of downtime this visit, which is a bit unusual. We're usually kind of go, getting lots of steps when we do visits together. My health is a bit more down than it is up lately, so I wasn't up to a lot of moving around, and we had lots of downtime, which in this case was really nice. Got lots of knitting, and you know, my parents were really pleased to just have some, you know, we all just kind of sat on the couch together and watched things and spent time together that way, and that was really, really nice. But I'm rambling at you, digressing, but all of that to say, I did want to dive right in and get knitting as fast as I could. And if I'd had a few more days to kind of sleep on it, I think what I would have done, because it's a fold over collar, I think I would have cast on initially in one of the contrast colors and worked up to just a row or two shy of the kind of halfway fold over point, and then I would have switched to the main color that Mum wants near her face, just because there's a bit of, you know, there's some volume of main color here that's going to be hidden, and I might want more of that later on. So that's something I would have done if I had more time to think on this. But also, like, you know, c'est pas la fin du monde. Not the end of the world at all, and I have a habit of overthinking. So there's my, you know, tidbit of overthinking in this sweater. The other modification that I have made up to this point is that I stopped the yoke about, I think it was about 5 rounds earlier than the pattern called for. And that is because, and even in the pictures online of the sample knit, you can tell that this sweater is designed with quite a low yoke. And that is, you know, partially to accommodate this beautiful pattern, which I haven't really shown you, have I? But it says on the pattern page that Stormur is the Icelandic word for storm, and Mayu asks in her description if you can see the ships coming in through the water, and to me these are the ships, you know, these beautiful, this really lovely graphic motif at the bottom, which I'm really a fan of. And in the pattern it called for kind of 2 rows of ships. But Mum and I were looking at the pattern, at the, you know, the pictures together, and kind of seeing what she wanted in terms of fit in comparison to how the samples looked in the photos, and looking at you know, other examples that people had knit on Ravelry. And Mum wanted a quite high underarm, and so we kind of compromised. We made sure that there was enough underarm that it would fit her comfortably and that she'd be able to wear other shirts underneath, because I think that's one of those things that I certainly didn't think of when I was an early sweater knitter, is that you want some space. And I tend to err on the side of more space rather than less space, just because, you know, I don't like that feeling of being bunched up. But anyways, so we were trying that on periodically, and when I got to the end of the first ship pattern, it was clear that Mum was going to have lots of room. That was going to be plenty. My mum is a more petite woman than I am. I'm quite tall. She's always joking that she, you know, is by far the shortest person in our family now. She's very average height, but she certainly didn't need extra depth in the yoke, so that is what we did. And that also allowed us to, you know, speed up, and I really did finish the yoke with plenty of time before they left. I was able to separate for sleeves and get a little bit of knitting done on the body. And then even some of this, probably about this much is what I've done since they left. But you know, I got probably this far on the sleeve while they were still here. So I was thrilled. I feel like I have a really good reference for how Mum wants this to fit. I also had her try on this sweater of mine and several other hand knit sweaters that I have for myself. And we made lots of notes about, generally she wants the sleeves a bit shorter. I have quite long arms. And generally she wants the bodies a little bit longer because I like the cropped sweaters and she doesn't want this sweater to be cropped. So I have lots of notes about, you know, how much longer and shorter in relation to several of my sweaters. And I'm definitely nervous about continuing this sweater without her to try it on, because I, you know, even more than with sweaters I'm knitting for myself, I want this to be perfect. I want it to be, you know, my mom's new favorite sweater. But she very sweetly is, you know, gonna love it however it turns out. So that is the way I'm going forward. I don't think there are gonna be any other major modifications, but I will let you know as I check back in about this knit project. And oh, I guess the other thing to touch base on is, oh, 2 things actually. In the previous episode, when I was talking about knitting my own Plötulopi sweater, I was saying that, you know, I thought maybe I was having joint issues and soreness issues because of the Plötulopi, and that has definitely continued. I think that because it is an unspun yarn and there isn't that elasticity or that bounce, it does, at least to me, I'd still be really curious if anyone else has had this experience or heard about this experience, because I feel like a little bit of off on my own. Maybe it's in my head, but certainly I'm experiencing more soreness when I knit with this wool in my hands and my elbows and my shoulders, and this time it was creeping up into my neck a little bit. So, I mean, I have various joint conditions. I have some pre-existing issues that would, you know, be easily aggravated more than other people, I think, unfortunately. But I feel like it really was a bit more like knitting with a linen or a cotton, just because of that lack of elasticity. So that did continue, and I am both very excited to keep going on this sweater and feeling like, you know, there's no rush now. There's no particular deadline to get this done, because we're coming into warm weather and Mom's certainly not going to wear it this summer, so I'm not going to ship it to her. I'll finish it and I'll probably bring it with me next time we go to visit. And it's quite nice that there isn't a big deadline, because I am definitely going to try to pace myself. Also, the most fun part of the sweater is now definitely over, so it'll be a bit easier to pace myself. I don't know if anyone else has that experience. It's really hard to slow down in a colorwork yoke. I've only done it a few times, but oh my gosh, it's hard to slow down. That's really fun. So I'm definitely going to be slowing myself down with this going forward. The final thing to say about this is it was so interesting, actually, to knit my Plötulopi sweater and then Mom's Plötulopi sweater so close, on, one on the heels of the other, because, they're from the same place. She bought them in the same shop in Iceland at the same time. They're obviously different colors, and dyes can affect, gauge and the way yarn behaves to a certain degree. But I found that the experience of knitting this Plötulopi very, very different than knitting the experience of the gray Plötulopi, and really kind of a more positive experience overall. And what I mean by that specifically is that I had read everywhere that, Plötulopi is it comes apart, but then it's so easy to stick back together. And that certainly was my experience of the gray. But I did find with the gray, the fibers tended to be, well, for one thing, the yarn itself, the unspun yarn itself seemed a bit thicker with the gray, and the individual guard hairs seemed to be thicker. And that meant that the smaller hairs stuck together quite well, but the individual guard hairs didn't really want to stick together as much. And I, occasionally had to felt them a little bit, or even wet felt them a little bit, like a bit of a spit splice. And that wasn't a problem. I split splice by preference most of the time, so I was like, yes, this is so easy to work with, this is great. But these brown colorways, the brown and the beige and the dark brown, which I didn't bring into this room with me, but you can see them in the sweater here, were so much easier. Like, on the scale of easy, these were the easiest I've ever worked with in terms of sticking them back together. They really didn't need to be felted at all. It really was just kind of press them, and then I could keep going. And I was nervous initially that they seemed a bit thicker. I was worried that would result in an airier fabric. I'm knitting at a very similar gauge as I was on this sweater, but the combination of this being colorwork, and so, has kind of double thickness, and just the yarn does fluff up quite nicely as you work with it. I think it'll fluff up even more nicely when I block it. That hasn't been an issue at all. So yeah, but really interesting to knit with this on the heels of the gray Plötulopi, because I am enjoying this even more. And it's always nice to have a sense, I think, of the kind of spectrum of experiences that you will have with a given yarn. And I'm feeling like, now I really know that no matter what happens with Plötulopi, I like working with it. No matter what, no matter what kind of Plötulopi I receive, if I order some in future, I'm really going to enjoy it, because this is a really fun yarn to work with for me, and it has a good spectrum of easy workability. So that is my Stormur. I've probably babbled about that too much already, but that's my main work in progress. And now I'll just talk to you very quickly about some other plans that I have, especially since I need some shiny plans to distract myself so that I don't just push too hard on this and cause some discomfort or even some damage in my joints. So on to new shiny things. on to other shiny projects to keep me busy. The first thing that I am going to be knitting with, and I am so nervous about this actually, but I think it'll be good, is I posted that video several weeks ago now about becoming a spinner, about spinning my own fiber for the first time, and I held up that 100 grams of white Shetland top that I had combed, and it has been sitting on a shelf ever since, and I've been too nervous to knit with it. But I've seen a few people since. I think Yenta was talking about this, and I've then asked a few spinners that I know whether or not they've used their first ever handspun, and lots of people seem to hold on to their first ever handspun as a skein, just as an example of where they started. So that's making me feel a little bit less nervous, and it's freeing me up a little bit. Maybe I don't have to knit with that, or at least not right away. It is quite loosely spun, my first handspun, and I think I'm a bit worried that it wouldn't be very durable. You know, I was planning on making a small scarf, and scarves don't usually get too much wear, but I was a bit worried that it, you know, might still fall apart or just not hold up well over a long period of time, and I definitely want to keep that first yarn. So for now, at least, I'm giving myself a pass, and I'm gonna move on to my second handspun, which is very dark and I suspect not going to show up on camera very well, but this is beautiful dark brown. This is about 105 grams of zwartbles, which I spun, again, like the first one, a little bit on lots of different weights of spindles and on drop spindles and Turkish spindles. So again, probably a little bit inconsistent, but honestly, looking at it, it's even just so much more consistent than my first spin. So I'm pretty proud of this. You know, I'm pretty excited about it. It's by no means perfect, but I'm not really aiming for perfection. I'm aiming for joy. So I always feel self-conscious saying that, but that's the goal. So I have plied this up. I haven't actually washed it yet. I need to wet set it. I think I'm going to do that after I film. But I have just around exactly 200 meters right now, and the Shetland, it didn't change yardage or meterage too much when I wet set it, so depending on whether or not this changes a lot, I'm thinking again of making a small scarf. I only own one small scarf that I knit years ago in an opal sock yarn, superwash. Not my preference in terms of wool at all now that I know more about different wools and their purposes. Opal sock yarn is great, but I wouldn't pick that for a scarflet that I'm going to have right against my neck again necessarily. But I wear that small scarf all the time because I find it really useful to tuck in right against my neck. Even wearing a bigger scarf over top, I lose a lot of my heat, I think, from this part of my body. And so a small scarflet that I can really tuck down really tight inside a coat and then put another scarf over top has turned out to be, like, you know, an absolute wardrobe staple for me. So I think, you know, I could easily knit several more of those and not have too many of them. And the pattern that I'm looking at for this one is the Pumila scarf by Ayano Tanaka, and this is a pattern which I believe she released over a year ago in Japanese, but she's just released it in English, and it is really delicate and beautiful and calls for just about 180 meters of yarn in fingering weight. So I'm hoping that this will work for that. If it doesn't, I'm going to knit that pattern anyways. I'll find something else that's appropriate. But at the moment, that's the plan for this zwartbles, and wish me luck because I'm just going to be brave and knit with my handspun. I don't know why I'm so nervous about it. I think it's just, it feels, I am definitely susceptible to letting things become too precious and making myself nervous to work with them. And I am, you know, in my goals and intentions, I was trying to be strict with myself that I don't want to do that. I want to knit the joy. So that's plan number one. Plan number two, along the same lines, starts with the yarn. And this is Estelle Eco Shetland worsted. This is a woolen spun yarn. It's a Canadian woolen spun yarn, though looking at the label, it is made in Turkey. This is the state of our globalized world. But this yarn I actually bought from a Canadian retailer and had sent to my parents' house before they came over, and they very kindly made room in their luggage to bring this over for me. So I have 5 skeins of this Eco Shetland worsted, and when I bought it I was looking at a few different patterns, but I realized kind of in the process of filming that goals and intentions video that actually this would be so perfect for the Caledonia sweater by Sylvia Watts Cherry that I had been saying I want to knit. And I am nervous about knitting that one as well because it is both bottom up and completely seamed, so a little bit less wiggle room for changing measurements and things like that. So it'll be a bit of a challenge, but that's kind of what I'm hoping for. I want it to be hopefully a good, not a discouraging challenge, but you know, a good motivational challenge. So that is the plan for this wool. I think I'm going to be, you know, knitting these both slowly alongside the Stormur, and I'm pretty excited about it. I feel like I'm already, you know, that goals and intentions video has really set me up to, it's making picking the next project a little bit easier, so I'm glad that I did that. Is there anything else I wanted to say about this? Oh yes, there was one more thing, which is just that another reason that I'm especially motivated to knit the Caledonia sweater right now is that I was fortunate enough, I said goodbye to my parents on Friday the 26th of April, which was just a few days ago now, and left them kind of on their way off to the airport, and I went off into Newcastle and caught a train to Edinburgh to go to the Woolly Good gathering. I did take a little bit of footage at the festival, or Wool Festival, so I might put that up as a video in a little while, you know, in a week or so. But I attended a few really excellent talks while I was there, and a real highlight of that festival for me was I saw a talk given by Sylvia Watts Cherry, and she was fabulous. I expected to like it, and I had seen kind of a version of the talk online before. She gave a version of the talk with John Arbon Textiles, and they put a copy up online, and I had seen that. But even having, you know, seen some of the content of the talk before, she was so charismatic in person. It was so different being in the room with her than watching it. She was so funny. So I'm extra motivated, if still a little bit nervous, to knit the Caledonia, and I'm in love with this green woolen yarn. So that's the plan. And next time I check in, hopefully I will have cast on one or both of these new projects, and we'll have some progress on Stormur to show you. So thank you so much for tuning in with me again. I think that's everything I have to ramble at you about today. I hope that you are having some warm weather wherever you are in the world today, and that you've got some good making time in as well. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.